On behalf of Tibet Foundation, I welcome you all for coming here for this evening's talk, and also thank Professor Yudru Tsomu for agreeing to come to give this talk. Yudru Tsomu and husband Bugana are here in Cambridge to work on a research project with Professor Berger. Yesterday we invited Professor Yudru Tsomu to give a talk at Oxford, and today, on behalf of Foundation, we have organized this talk for the Tibetan community and any other interested people. So the subject, as you can see, is quite obvious and very interesting. And just yesterday in India, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been the chief guest at the first International Women's Parliament in Amravati, and emphasized the importance of women's role in social, economic, and development of peace, etc. And in our Tibetan context, it's a really interesting subject to see what role Tibetan women played in the development of Tibetan history, but story have really little focus on the role played by Tibetan women. And in one area of Tibet, in Kham area, Yudru Tsomu has done extensive research, and tonight we'll be hearing her research findings and other narratives. And therefore, the talk will be in English, because we announced that it will be English, thinking that there will be quite a lot of non-Tibetans or non-Tibetan speakers coming. So we'll continue, we'll stick to it, and Professor will speak in English. And after about 40 minutes or so, we'll have question and answer sessions. And the question and answers should be restricted only to tonight's talk. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Lieutenant Dolma, for the nice introduction. I will speak just very briefly in Tibetan, first. And then just so the Tujishi Shugin, and the Cambridge, Dawaji, the Shurana Gana, Ketanan, the Nyarong Shinju, Chance Longo Jia, then a beg of Shujo, and Gogab the Ramanura, Nimana, Lota Kalada, the 단지 개나 송송아 데 콘소 카시데 가서 인지 등록시에서는 인지 등록시에서인 데네 셰주바 제로 now. So as you can see, it's a catchy title, and I have to really admit it's really a work in progress. And this I have been reading about what we Tibetans call the Dumusung, Kamba Dumusung, or Kamba Dromanamsung for many years. And in the past, when I was doing my own research for my dissertation, I thought maybe it would be good if I can find more sources about Tibetan women. However, throughout my work, actually, there was only one woman figure I came across in the study of my Nyarong, entire Nyarong history, and also Kham history, and that was very depicted very negatively as a very strong, very wrathful, very seditious. So I was thinking maybe it would be a good idea at one point if I can really look into the role of women in Tibetan history, or in Kham history, Tibetan history in general, and Kham history in particular. And so last year in 2016 at Bergen at the IADS, I organized a panel with Lara Marconi, a colleague from CNRS, and we specifically called this as a gender panel, and it happened to be all women scholars. So at the time, I thought maybe I should really look carefully into these Kambe Dumusung or Kambe Dromanamsung and really look at what kind of role they played in the local politics. And that's the result of it is a half-baked paper. Right now, I'm working on it. So first of all, before I really talk about my topic, I want to show you a picture of these places. I think this one picture seems to be too big. Just give you a sense where these Khampe Dumusong I'm talking about. Here, Nyarong, of course, that's a place I studied for my dissertation. Nyarong is one of them. And then Derge here is another one. And I think Karze should be up here. Karze here. So these three women came from these 3 places here. The map is really too big. Yeah. So want to give you a sense. All these 3 women, they were at the heart of Kham, not like in Dazindo or in the border area. And so I want to show you in the 19th and early 20th century what kind of role they played in politics and what kind of limitations they encountered and how they dealt with it. So first of all, these are more for the academic, like when I did my presentation, but I want to show you in the literature itself. Most of the studies argue that Tibetan culture actually really privileged women with more freedom compared with women of other parts of Asia, like China, India, or others. However, if you look into the Tibetan historical narratives, you would still feel that, it will claim that it's actually dominated by patriarchal narratives. So even though we actually heard about, like we have heard about all these Khampa Dumusong or Khampa Domanamsong, all these, and we knew about it, but very rarely these were being treated as a very serious academic subject. So you really see in cultural and discourses, there lacks some of the discussion of women's role. However, whenever they appear, as I mentioned, the only figure I found on my study of the Nyarong history, they were depicted very negatively, but it's very ambivalent attitude toward them. When they appeared, either they were endowed with supernatural qualities, like as deities like Khampe Domanamsong, or malignant figures like Khampa Dumusong. Yeah? I apologize for the Tibetan, it didn't come out very well, so I wrote the transliteration. So I want to show you it's really a very different attitude, in a way, it's an ambivalent attitude towards the women as a whole. So for these 3 Demonesses of Kham or 3 Khampa Dumu, when you really analyze it, you would see it's really, on one hand, they were feared and as powerful and strong women. At the same time, you feel also attracted to them. Yeah? So you use both, consider them to be both benevolent and malignant, showing both fear and attraction. So I'm going to skip this part, yeah, that's for more academic ones. But I want to show you who are these 3 figures. The very first one is called Khangsar Yangchen Dolma, also known as Khangsar Yangchen Kandru. As you can see, she lived through 1853 to 1935 in Karze, in northern Kham. And in oral tradition, she played a very important role. She was depicted as one of the most important female chieftains or leaders in the Khamsa family or Khamsa chieftain in northern Kham. The second one I'm going to look at is Jagod Tsewang Dolma in Derge. For those of you who are familiar with Kham history, Derge is a very important region in Kham, and Jagod family was one of the biggest Dongko family, like aristocratic retinue of the king since the 19th century. And so Jagod Tsewang Dolma played a very important role in the 20th century Derge history. But as you can see, I have no dates for her. Yeah? So this will say something about the biases against women in Tibetan culture and historical narratives. The last one, I think most of you are probably more familiar, is the Gyari Rinpoche's great aunt, yeah? Gyari Chime Dolma. It's in 1905 to 1939 in Nyarong. And so luckily, I found some Tibetan sources for this. Yeah, so I'm going to skip this part, but I want to show you that when I was doing the modern history of Kham, one problem I face is very little Tibetan sources. And so I have to really comb through a lot of biographies, namtas. But this one, for this article, I was fortunate enough to find some Tibetan sources. I think Gachesu Juqin Tudena wrote 21 volumes of mythology about his life. And in there, I found a really nice description of both the Jagod Tsewang Dolma and also the Khangsar Yangchen Dolma. So that's the very first one I found. The second one is Derge Loji by Yudru Tsomu from Derge for Derge Sichuan, Derge People's Consultative Conference. He published an entire memoir or account of the Derge. In there, I also found quite nice detailed descriptions of these two figures. The last one, I think most of you are more familiar with, is Nyarong Aden's mythology in Tibetan, and also Gyari Dolma translated into English. So here, found very precious, very short, only 2 paragraphs about the Chime Dolma. So these are the Tibetan sources, even though limited, but I'm still happy to be able to find them. The Chinese sources have much more, and it's interestingly, especially for Chime Dolma, because he fought against the nationalists. He actually, I'll show you later, he was involved in the Kamba rule of Kham movement in 2 of them, 1935 and 1939. So there were many, many writings about her, much more than any other. And so for a lot of articles about Chime Dolma from the Republican period journals as well, because when these Chinese magistrates, when they were sent to rule in the 1930s, late 20s, 30s, when they were sent to rule Ganzi, they found that they had to be on good terms with her. Yeah? And so they had a very detailed description of how she dealt with them. The last one is Ganzizhou Wenshi Ziliao. It's in Chinese, selected culture and historical materials of Ganzi Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. Even though it's in Chinese, a lot of them actually narrated by local Tibetans, and they translate into Chinese. So in a sense, I treat it as oral sources as well. So the last one is more secondary sources, like gazetteers of Karze, Nyarong, and Derge, and that's I use to allow me to get a sense of the general background of how they rose to power. So that's all for the sources. I think only scholars care much about it. So another thing I was trying to do in this paper is really not to provide anything definite yet. Yeah? So what I'm trying to do is really initiate what Gyana said is a preliminary discussion of the Khamba women's role in the political life. And first of all, I want to examine how did they rise to power, under what circumstances, in terms of, in relation to like the local political milieu or the rule of inheritance in Tibetan society, very different from the Chinese. I'll provide some comparisons when I talk about it. And also the relationship between power, authority, and property ownership. Yeah. So that's the second one. Last one, I want to, next one, I want to really look at saying what kind of limitations they encountered through their ascendancy, and what strategies they used to overcome them. And so I'll focus on, because it's 3 case studies, so I mostly focus on this point. The last one is, through this case study, I also want to comment a little bit on what we understand to be the status of Tibetan women. And with this occasion, I also want to reflect on how the Tibetan historiography deal with the women's role. And so it's very ambitious, yeah. I'm still working on it. So first of all, I'm going to really give an introduction to the Khangsar Yangchen Dolma. So look at her path to authority. Under what circumstances she became the chieftain, the 7th Khangsar chief or chieftain. In Chinese, they all call Tusi, yeah, we say Bun, yeah, Khangsar Bun. It's very interesting. She was actually the only child to the 6th Khangsar Bun, and she was born out of wedlock. So if those of you who are familiar with the Chinese circumstances, it's impossible for any child born out of wedlock to really succeed to the position. However, in Tibetan case, because she was the only one, and so she was able to, when her father passed away in 1875, she was appointed to be, or she was not appointed, but she succeeded to the chieftaincy, and she became the 7th Khangsar chief. So even she was a daughter, also born out of wedlock. In Tibetan case, part of the reason it has a lot to do with emphasis on carry on the family name, or in anthropological terms, they call it house society. So it's more important to be able to carry on the name of the house, like Kami, instead of emphasizing on descent per se. But in Chinese case, it's very important, the bloodline. Yeah? So if it's if somebody were born out of wedlock, out of question, it won't be. So it's very interesting for her. So I think for her to become the chieftain of the Khangsar had a lot to do with the Tibetan indigenous rule of inheritance, and also rule of inheritance of or inheriting official titles, political authorities. And so not necessarily according to the Chinese rules, yeah, not the, all these strict rules they have in paper saying you would be only be able to pass on the chieftaincy to a male line, but that's not the case, yeah, in Tibetan case. Also for Tibetan women at the time, throughout the time, especially during the period I'm studying, they actually had the right to own property, very different from all the other like Chinese or other Asian people there. There are many ethnographical writings during the Republican period. They really marveled at the ability for the Tibetan women to become heads of the family. So when they had a census, actually they list some women as head of the family. So a lot of the Chinese ethnologists, they really wrote, and they think it's really different. Yeah. Another last thing very different from the Chinese is for Tibetan women to have mabas, yeah, to have men to marry into the family and to live with them. And so in China, for a lot of times, people would look down upon the mabas because they were the ones who would be looked down upon, saying like you became like sort of you're like a second-class citizens. But in Tibetan case, as I show in these cases, actually mabas had equal right sometimes also to inherit the family property, family official titles, all these. So for her, it's very interesting, especially in Zhu Qin's book, give me really good ideas and what happened with her and her husband. So initially, like the family, because the Khangsar family had always had marriage alliances with the Derge family or with Dengos, with aristocratic retinues under the Derge family. And so they wanted to really continue that marriage alliance. So they initially proposed to have the Jamberenqing, the second son of the Derge king, to become the son-in-law of Yangchen Dolma, son-in-law of the Khamsa family, becomes the husband of Yangchen Dolma. However, the Derge family refused, and with the excuse that Jamberenqing was a monk. And it's partly true, I think. He was a monk at the time. But at the time, they were also fighting, the two brothers. One is Jamberenqing, who eventually went into exile in central Tibet, but the other brother, older brother, Doji Senge, they were fighting over the chieftaincy. So in a sense that when Khangsar family asked for the marriage alliances, the family didn't want to give Jamberenqing an edge over his brother by forming marriage alliances with the Khangsar. So they refused. However, they found a solution to it. So they proposed that instead have Atu Tsewang, one of the Atu family was Dengko, one of the Dengko family, like aristocratic retinue, like a minister level, become adopted, be bestowed as a prince of Derge. and so gave him the same status as a Derge Se, and then had him marry into the family. However, it's very interesting. This caused some problems for later. I'll show you saying why it's that's the case. Is at the time when Yudru Tsomu married into the family, he had the expectation he would become the Maba, who would be the chieftain. And that's one way, that's one thing I think the limitations that the women figures face. Because the inheritance system still privileged the men, even though the man was not blood relation. Yeah. However, so it was very customary, it's a customary practice for these son-in-laws to become chieftain if they were very capable. But unfortunately, Yangchen was a very strong-willed woman, very capable. So she actually, in a way, she was not ready to give up the chieftaincy. Another explanation through the oral interviews, people argue maybe because of the Yudru Tsomu's family status was much lower than the Derge family, and that's part of the reason she was not ready to give up her chieftaincy. So this caused internal fighting between the two factions within the Khangsar family. So one group of the Benbo, one group of the officials sided with Yangchen Kangzhou. The other group actually sided with Yudru, and they fought for a long period of time. Eventually, she was able to really defeat her husband, and her husband was forced out. So she was able to actually negotiate the divorce. And that's something I think it's very telling, yeah, in that time as a Tibetan woman to initiate a divorce and to be able to carry it out. And here, through the mediation of Nyarong, and that's one of the things I think in my book I wrote an entire chapter about Nyarong. So after Gompo Nangje was defeated in 1865, the Central Tibetan government established Nyarong to rule the Kham. And so at the time, Nyarong power and authority extended far beyond the Nyarong, actually also had the jurisdiction or more or less control over northern Kham, like in Karze. So this can be probably used as an example to support what my argument in my book also. So probably in 1898, I said probably because Tibetan sources, they don't give us detailed dates. But I was trying to figure out when their second son was born, and that's around that time, like 1898. They got divorced after their second son, who was the Khangsar Jangun, the second Khangsar Jangun of the Karze monastery. So in any event, so through the mediation of the Nyarong Jichop, they actually granted a divorce for the couple. So their son, Yudru Tsomu, succeeded to the chieftaincy. However, he was very young. He was like only 11. And so Yangchen Kangzhou actually ruled as a regent for a long time on. So that's something I think I want to just to mention, that the fact that Tibetan women enjoy the freedom to initiate divorce. But in her case, it's elite women, yeah, with the support of the family. Next, I want to really go very, very briefly. In my paper, I really look into her role, how she expanded the territory or jurisdiction of the Khangsar region. But I just want to show you, it's very interesting, like she was very skilled, and she had arranged 2 marriage alliances. One with Masu family, another major family, Kamba, we'll say Hokonga, yeah? You 5 like chieftains in Ho area, that's in Karze area, and also Zhanggu area. But she actually arranged 2 marriage alliances with 2 of them. And the very first one for her son, yeah? Very first one she did is with Masu family. So in 1904, when the Masu chieftain was assassinated by others, then Masu became part of the territory controlled by Khangsar. And then the second thing I want to really talk about is in Chinese. They had detailed description of how she defied Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng, the like notorious Chinese bannerman, who carried out the, what they call it, Gaitu Guiliu, replacing the indigenous leaders with government appointed officials. And he was a bannerman. So in fact, in Chinese, they had one story saying when Zhao Feng was trying to enter the Ganzi city, Yangchen country actually refused. So Zhao Feng had to stay at the outskirts of the Ganzi with a monastery there, Gunlade, and then left for Derge. And so it's very interesting here. You can see that she seemed to be very strong, powerful, and with a lot of support with her retinue there. I'm not going to go detail. I have many other stories. Just want to show you that. The second thing is, right after the collapse of the Qing in 1911, her family, just before that, her family was stripped off all the titles and confiscated all the properties. And they were actually captured when they were trying to flee from the Ganzi area. So their family were kept in a prison in Masu, and then eventually they actually exiled them into a region to the west of the Nyachu. So she actually found a way to get out of it by forging another marriage alliances with the Bering king, Bering Jabu, I think one of the five, also Hokonga. So in a sense that she was very resourceful. For her, I'm going to just leave it there. Yeah, we can come back there. The second one, and also the weakest link in my paper, is Jagod Tsewang Dolma. And partly I say weakest link is I don't have a lot of detailed information about her, especially I don't even know when she was born, when she passed away. Except in oral sources, they had very generic description of her, especially her path to power was very different from the Khangsar Yangchen Dolma, because Khangsar Yangchen Dolma was the only daughter, so she succeeded. However, Jagod Tsewang Dolma was the wife to Jagod Tsewang Dolma. And when the Jagod Tsewang Dolma was a very important minister to the Rinchen, the younger son of the Derge king. So in around 1906-07, when Tsewang Dolma was assassinated, then Tsewang Dolma, because their children were still very young, including Jagod and later, very young. So she became the sort of like the chieftain or regent to lead the Jagod family's followers. So in many of the account, very nice account, but very generic thing, she led the troops of the Jagod to fight against the Chinese on behalf together with the Rinchen. Especially there are I think also description of when they went into exile. They were defeated by the Chinese troops under Zhao Feng and his older brother. So they went into exile in Qinghai, where that Rinchen's relative, I think one of the related to him is Jiang Shiba of Laram Jashiji. So arranged them to temporarily settle in Qinghai, but it happened to be that the 13th Dalai Lama was traveling back to central Tibet. So they followed the 13th Dalai Lama back into central Tibet, and then they had also description of Jagod Tsewang Dolma led his men, her men or her troops to fight against the Chinese in the 1911-1912, when the 13th Dalai Lama called on all Tibetans to drive the Chinese troops out of central Tibet. So as a result, actually, they were given a title called headman, Goba of Jiangzhou, I think somewhere in Nachu area. So they became part of the aristocrats there. But the problem is, other than these really generic descriptions, I don't have a lot of sources about her, except I can tell that how she arranged, she actually took advantage of the close relationship with the 13th Dalai Lama. So when in 1917, 1918, when the Tibetan troops, especially under the Champa Danda, Galun Champa Danda, controlled, established Domei Jichao and controlled the Kham, she actually asked the 13th Dalai Lama to help to restore the family power and authority in Derge. And so she was it seemed to us she was very farsighted. She sent both of her children back they moved to Wangbudui or Wangbuding to the west of the Zhichu, because they were afraid that the older brother would the Doji Senge, the old son of the Dege king, would would have a revenge on them, and so they temporarily settled to the west, in the Jungda area, in Wangbuding in Jungda area, and then she sent both of her sons back to Zilokta, where they studied with all these Tibetan aristocrats like noble children, and so this really laid the foundation for Jagod later to really return to Derge and become a major political figure in Derge. I wrote another paper about her, about him. So he rose to become really, towards the end, 1940s, 1950s, to become the headman, the minister who could rival with the Derge king. So that's something I want to mention. Another thing I think she did was arrange marriage alliances again. So had Jagod marry into the Lharibu. It's one of the four major areas in Derge, in Yilong area. And so that's really allowed Jagod to become a great leader there. Other than that, I don't have a lot. And so I was thinking about this, is lack of information about her is also very telling. Even though we know that she was very instrumental in restoring the power and authority of the family, and we do hear some generic description of her. But as soon as Jagod then became adult and really became the head of the family, she disappeared from all the written sources or all the oral sources. So I think here again, probably it's in Tibetan cultural and historical discourse, we have a tendency or emphasis on the role of patriarchal descent in religion, in politics, and also other fields. And that's part of the reason, even though we know these major leaders, like important female leaders existed, but we really don't read too much about them. So I will leave you with, I think the Gyari Chime Dolma is my favorite one because I have more Tibetan sources, very detailed sources about her. But it's very interesting. The path for her to power was also slightly different. Like I think her father, Gyari Doji Namje, had two daughters, and so Gyari Chime Dolma was the elder daughter, and then have a younger one. And so at the time, they were hoping that they would have again a maba, a son-in-law, marry into the family to carry on to become the Dongbun. It's like head of the thousand households, like in Tibetan case, in Chinese called Qianhu, to have that title. So they actually, it's very interesting. Part of the reason I was fascinated by her is, compared with the other two female leaders, she actually exerted much broader impact all over, not just Nyarong, also Kham, even though she lived a very short period of time, died very young. And so, again, as I mentioned, that they had Wangchu Doji from the Shiwa family in Ganze. If there are people from Ganze, then you probably know Shiwa family was one of the main important headman family in Ganze area. And so Gyari Chime Dolma's father actually arranged Wangchu Doji to marry into the family, hoping that he would be the next Dongbun, next chieftain for the Nyarong. And there was a reason for this, because the Shiwa family was also the Chime Dolma's mother's family, like natal family. So they wanted to have a relative to marry into the family. Again, something happened, but this one is more romantic in a way. So he actually fell in love with the younger one, younger sister, two sisters. Younger sister Benmu Dolma. And in the Tibetan sources and Chinese sources, they describe her as very young, very beautiful, very attractive. And in contrast, they actually described Chime Dolma was more very masculine, not look like a man, and very strong. And so in a sense that because of this, they became really sworn enemies. And so there are many Chinese sources, also Tibetan sources, describing how they compete, like how they trying to piss off or like have the other one be mad at them. Like some of the details I'm going to spare you with that, but except that Chime Dolma thought it was she was losing faith, yeah, because her husband fell in love with the sister. So she actually had, according to the sources, she had some affairs with other people who lose faith. And so eventually they became really sworn enemy, especially after the younger sister died. So Chime Dolma actually persuaded her father to drive the Wanchu Dorje out of the Nyarong Gyari family. And so this caused a major problem. It's forced divorce, yeah. And so later, I think it's very, the dispute with her husband, I have sources like describing really undermined the power and authority of the Gyari family. Partly is that for her husband actually, Jagod, led his followers from Karze to raid the Nyarong area and to revenge. Yeah? And also the local people suffered greatly. So have many petitions from the local people saying they should stop fighting, otherwise we would suffer, because they need to provide all these fighting men to be on these military raids there. So interestingly for hers, I think the reason I'm very fascinated about her is she was one of the very few female Tibetan leaders during the 20th century to be involved in the Khampe Rangsi Rangjung movement. That's, there were three major ones, and she was involved in two later ones. One is 1935. For those of you who are more familiar with the Republican period history, this was a movement launched by Gara Lama from Chamdo area. He was in exile in Nanjing, and he had some grudges against the central Tibetan government. And at the same time, he also didn't like all the Chinese warlords in Kham. So Gara Lama actually in 1935, 1936, he took the opportunity to ask the permission from the Chiang Shek to allow him to enter into, to go to Kham to block all the Red Army. And that's what he did. But on the side, he actually launched the Khampe Rangsi Rangjung, the Khampa rule for Kham movement. And so many of the local chieftains, including Gyari Chime Dolma's father, and also many others like Jagod Jagod Tsewang Dolma's son, many of them were involved in it. But the reason what Chime Dolma did was outstanding is she actually was actively involved in the military expeditions against all these Chinese, including she fought with both Red Army and also the Sichuan troops, number 24 army under the Liu Wenhui there. So I have sources in Chinese and Tibetan, not very clear, but they said they killed many. Yeah? But in Chinese, actually, she led her followers to execute it. One of the Chinese magistrate in Nyarong, and also a translator and a few others. So for them, and then Gara Lama actually appointed her to be the magistrate of Nyarong. And that's, in Kham history, she was the only female magistrate, even though she only, her position lasted only for a few months, yeah? But she was able to reach that high level. And so eventually, I'm going to brief here, but it's very interesting. One thing I want to share is in the sources, in Chinese sources, the Chinese magistrate were trying to mediate between Chime Dolma and the Wanchu Dorje. And so it took them about 2 months, yeah, in Chinese, literally they said, took them about 2 months to negotiate how to settle the dispute. And then after the Gara Lama was defeated, was captured by the Red Army, and Gara Lama died of illness. Yeah, that's the source says. Then that's the end of the Khampa rule of Kham movement. And so after that, then the number 24 army under Liu Wenhui, they came back and they took Chime Dolma into prison. So when she was in prison, the Chinese magistrate were trying to negotiate with Chime Dolma's father, saying, we need to settle the dispute between you and your son-in-law. And so it took them 2 months to figure out what to do. So one solution is, I think they actually, in their agreement, they agreed, they ordered Wangchi Dorje to pay them, pay Dorje Namje like 2,880 taels of silver. That's quite a lot of money, yeah, to compensate the loss, because he led all the troops to loot the area. And then in return for that, they actually ordered Chime Dolma to become a nun. So after they settled, they thought they settled the dispute, then she miraculously escaped from the prison. So this never really settled the case. So I'm going to really go very briefly saying what she did other than involved in the Khamba rule of Kham. She actually also tried to restore the power and the authority of her family. So we have description in Chinese, and she actually persuaded her father to defy the orders of the magistrate, refusing to pay the corvée labor, like Ula services. In addition, she turned to outside for help, especially one of the nationalist officials called Dai Chanxian, who was the director of the 考试院, like examination yuan of the nationalist government. So Dai happened to travel to Ganzi at the time when the ninth Panchen Lama passed away. So he was sent as a representative to really offer condolences to the Panchen Lama's camp. And so there, Chime Dolma actually went to meet with him and win the support from him. And so this caused some of the anxieties or worries from the Nyarong. He was worried that Chime Dolma and then the Ganzi and the Ninth Dalai Lama's camp, they all would come together, and then they would take over the control of at least northern Kham. So that's part of the reason I had more sources about the so-called her intriguings. Yeah. So it's very interesting that so she became confident of the Dai Chanxian. So she more or less got a promise to support, at least from the sources. So eventually, the last event I want to mention is another major, the Kham rule, Khamba rule of Kham was in 1939, when the Khangsar Yangchen Dolma, the last chieftain of Khangsar, fell in love with the guard, a captain of the ninth Panchen Lama's camp. This caused a major issue, like with the Nyarong, the Chinese warlord, because Nyarong was afraid that ninth Panchen Lama's camp would really gain a stronghold in northern Kham. And so he actually forbidden them to get married. And so eventually it caused a major conflict, and that in Chinese they call it Ganzi Shijie, but in Tibetan we say Ganzi Dunjie. So this was considered to be the third Khamba rule for Kham movement, because all these Ganzi family, they call on all Khambas saying we should work together, we should keep not only the Chinese warlords, we should keep the central Tibetan government out of Kham. We Khambas should come together to rule. However, few people actually responded, but Chime Dolma was one of the few who actually, they were trying to win her over. So they sent a representative to go to meet with her in Nyarong and promised to provide her with ammunition, weapons. And so she agreed to do so. So she was planning to disarm one of the platoons of the number 24 army stationed in Nyarong, but somehow the news got out, and so she was not successful. Eventually, she was captured and also executed. Very young, died at the age of 35. Yeah. So I share with you all these three women's life, and so what can we learn from all these case studies? I try to think about it, and I think.
What age she died?
Pardon?
35.
Yeah, 35, very young, yeah. And so, so what I want to really look at is, for her, it's a nice story, but one thing is, you would see that even though she was, her father relied on her greatly to deal with the local affairs. She was very active in leading the military expeditions, yet that her father actually had an order saying that in about 4 years, in about 4 years, her 16-year-old nephew would become the Dongbun, and she would not be. So you can see that, again, they have limitations against the women to be the true, real chieftain when there were other choices. Yeah? Only they were able to do so when you had no other sources. So you can see that, in fact, this shows that in the inheritance rule, you would see prioritize the male over the female ones. And another one, I think for gender study scholars, they will love it. When I present it at Bergen, they will say, wow, this piece is really good, is that in the Tibetan sources, especially Nyarong Aden's description, he wrote, praised her profusely with saying she was very good at fighting, but yet she has a Tibetan phrase is, here, because my Tibetan didn't display very well, po resena mo imba. Mo resena po dawashi. So if you say that she were a man, she looks like a woman. But if she, like if you say that she was a female, but she looked like a male. So in a sense, it's like more or less to really emphasize her identity in a way, saying that, I mean, we have different interpretations. We can interpret that for her to establish her authority, legitimacy, probably she had to dress like a man to claim that. But on the other hand, I am also tempted to think maybe it's easier for her to move about in the military actions just in man's dress. But this, I think this piece is very interesting, vivid images of her. Yeah? So I'm going to really go to my conclusion very long. I don't want to read, but what I try to do here is just really to show that the fact that we do not have enough sources about all these important female leader itself, I think it's very telling. And so this really, in my opinion, it probably has a lot to do with what I mentioned earlier, the emphasis on the role of patrilineal descent in religion, politics, and other fields in traditional Tibetan historiography and also traditions. So in a sense that their roles, especially in modern period, were overlooked and forgotten. And so, so these male-centered patriarchal assumptions actually marginalized or the role of women's role in the making of modern Tibet. And so here, I think I think for my paper, what I want to do is really to show here I didn't have time to go into, but in other papers I also did is really to show how Tibetan women were actively involved in different spheres of the like life, economic life. Like some women were actively engaging in trade to become middlewomen, and also in domestic sphere, of course, no need to emphasize that, but also in political sphere as well, especially during the time at that idly, right? I mean, but that can be like a simplification of the division of labor. But at least from those, you will see that women were very actively involved in the agriculture, job, or these also economic and domestic activities, and also they enjoy the same right to inherit the official titles, to own properties, and to become also to own in a way family properties. So it's inevitable for them also to be involved in political life. And so what I want to mention a little bit is here is when you really compare with the Chinese case in modern period. in China, if like say if one's father passed away, or one's husband died, or one's son was young, like all the cases I showed you, usually for women in Chinese, in the entire Chinese history, only Wu Zetian, Empress Wu were able to really become the emperor or empress. Other than that, even Derge Cixi, she had to really hide behind a curtain to be the to behind the scenes. But for Tibetan women, actually, I only mentioned these three, but there were other major prominent political leaders among Nyarong states as well. So in Nyarong, also in Ando area, among the Mongol Tibetan area as well. So I think for Tibetan women, really enjoyed the right to succeed to the indigenous leadership, and also their right their right itself also protected by both indigenous customary laws and also Chinese. Actually, some of the Chinese late Qing and Republican law as well. So they would actually, when a female head became the regent, they would actually allow them to really to act as regent without interfering there. So last thing. So I think okay. What I'm going to okay, so the last thing I want to emphasize is, as I mentioned, they faced with a lot of limitations. So both Yangchen Kangzhu and the Gyari Chime Dolma, they were very powerful. But according to the Tibetan customary law, they had their husband marry into their family, and this husband would actually take over the chieftaincy. And so you see that in the Tibetan inheritance, rule of inheritance, they still privilege male over female. And that's something I think it's very important to mention that. Yeah? I'm going to stop here. I think it's really a lot to unpack. Yeah? So if you have a question, I will be more than happy to answer. Yeah? I said very fast, yeah? So I'm not sure whether I'm clear or not.
Thank you very much. Questions, please raise your hands, and please restrict your questions strictly to the topic today. Anyone? Okay, while you're thinking, let me ask. In Tibetan history, early history, there is Trosatimale, 7th century. After Mangsong Mangze's husband died, she assumed power, I think, on 2 occasions. Now, and then she was able to assume power because of the support of the Gar.
Yeah, Gakha, yes.
So like that, now in these cases, were there very powerful men figures or a set of figures who made it possible for each of them in their own circumstances to become powerful?
Let me think about. I think for Gyari Chime Dolma, I didn't find whether it had male figures. I mean, in the Chinese description, her father was quite old and not as able as before. As for the families, I think they specifically mention some headman family. How do you call it? In Nyarong, they have 4 dongbens for head of the 1,000 families. And so for Gyari Tsewang was Nyadu. So there was the upper Nyarong. And then they have Nyame. Nyame is a Chogo Benden. They were sworn enemies. But there are 2 other chieftains seem to be on quite good terms with them. So I think more or less should have their support. And that's my guess for that. For Jagod Tsewang Dolma, I don't really have a lot of sources to allow me to see whether, because I can't even find sources about her own natal family. So I don't know who were behind her, except that at the time, except for her, when her son became very powerful, then Larabun is one of the major four regions where ministers for the court or for the central government of Derge originated, and they seem to be their loyal subject. But before that, I don't have sources. For Yangche Kangzhu, I think her family itself seemed to be very strong. So out of the 5 Hokong families I mentioned, Khangsar is one, her family. You have Masu, you have Beri, all these. But her family seemed to be the one dominates the politics of Northern Kham. Of course, also with the help of their headmen as well, because under the Bön, they have a type of official called the gsum. So maybe similar to headman under the Bön. And so, but I don't have a lot of sources to allow me to really pinpoint which families,
About the local monasteries?
Yes, monastery, that's a very good question because I was going through this very rushed. In terms of monasteries, especially for Ganzi family, Ganzi Khangsar Yangchen, the reincarnated Lama of the Ganzi monastery was actually the daughter of son of Khangsar Yangchen Dolma. And so later, when Tsering became the Khangsar Bön, so the Ganzi monastery was strongly behind them. And so in terms of Jagod family, I think early period I do not have enough sources to allow me to see which monasteries were behind them. But later sources for her son Jagod, then they were on very good terms with one of the two of the 5 ulas, like Shechin Gomba, and so like all these major Bei Gomba, and so it seemed to, as you can see that in Kham, any chieftains, any kings, if they wanted to really establish themselves, they had more or less either form alliances with the monasteries or at least to be able to control the monasteries. Gyari Chime, I think, Gyari Chime, I do not see a lot of very specific examples saying which monasteries sided with them, except I had during the Republican period, when their family, their authority started to decline, they were actually in competition for control over their subject with Dongdu Monastery, one of the major monasteries in Nyadu. And so I have many Chinese sources and some Tibetan lawsuit to really to accuse the Lama from the Dongdu Monastery to defy the Gyari family. So I have, instead of support, I have competition as well, rivalry there as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, in your choice for the title of this presentation, I wondered how you decided to choose which empire and how do these relate to the 3
Okay. Initially, when I came up with the title, I was thinking maybe I should instead of use this, should use something else. But the reason I use this is just want to show you, really to draw the audience or the reader's attention to show that Tibetans had very ambivalent attitude towards these very powerful female figures. And so in oral sources, both in oral sources and in written sources, I don't have many. In oral sources, they were called both names. One is called Kambe de Musung, the 3 Demonesses of Kham, and others refer to them as Kambe Dolma Namsung. Partly their names, all of them have a Dolma title in it. And just an anecdote, when I wrote to Gyari from Animation for sources, and I said, I'm looking for sources for Kambe de Musung, and he wrote to me very seriously saying, you couldn't use this alone. You have to also include the Dolma Namsung as well. So want to make sure that I had the perception of both. So I think this case studies probably also allow us to really look into the Tibetan historiography itself. Yeah? And I think nothing new in the world, because history is history. Yeah? It's not her story, right? Her history. So in a sense, if we really look through a gender lens, but I'm trying not to read too much into it, but I want to still bring the gender issue into this discussion. So you will see that there is a tendency to really sort of to be afraid of these powerful female leaders, female figures. And as I mentioned that in my study of Gompo Nangje for my dissertation, I come across like descriptions of wife of the Upper Nyarong chieftain who was very strong, strong-willed, and also very she was a character, yeah, like similar to what I describe here. So, but in the oral sources, tend to use the tropes, very familiar tropes. Talk about her to be very licentious, to be very wrathful, or irritable, and all these like durinyente, all these things, evil things about her. Yeah, in Tibetan we say durinyente. Yeah, so all the evil things to be added onto her. So this reminds me of even in Chinese when you when we read about description of Empress Wu. Yeah. All the Confucian scholars use the lens of the viewpoint of the Confucian to write this thing. So I think it's more generic, in a way, stereotype. So I'm trying to really. I'm still in the process. Yeah.
So it would appear that the Dolma is being used orally.
In oral, yes, but not in written sources. Also, Demonesses also. Only in oral. And so a lot of times when I did my field work and people were surprised, I know who these Demonesses were. Yeah. They were so, oh, do you know? You know, because I did very extensive field work in 2010 in the entire, I spent about 6 months like in Kham area. And so I asked people about it, and they were surprised that I know the names, who they were. Yeah. But they said like, it's at least it's a quite prevalent perception of them because of they were so strong. Yeah, had a reputation being very strong and iron fist. Especially, look, both of them divorced. Yeah, kicked their husband out. Yeah, so in a way, give them a bad reputation as well. Yeah. And they were able to. I think Yangchen Kandru, but Chime Dolma were able to lead expeditions, military expeditions, to fight alongside with her men. And in Nyarong at then, he wrote really quite. About her, very profusely praised her. Even though the term he used doesn't sound like, but I think judging from the way he wrote it, I can tell that he really admired her, because he wrote that she was the very few Tibetans who were able to kill so many Red Army soldiers and also the nationalist troops. And so I think all these military expeditions also give her fame and bad reputation as well.
Sounds like Rani Jhansi in India.
Oh, Palden.
I also wondered if the choice of the name could probably also be related to more prevalent use of Chogyam Namsum, Chogyam Namsum. In the Tibetan history, but I think for someone like me who never heard of this, who heard of Chogyam Namsum, can only relate to Namsum.
I see. I think all these like Demonesses or like Dolma Namsum, I think depending on who were talking about them. So people who were close to them probably feel that. I think it's like a different opinion maybe. But these are very prevalent in the Kham. Yeah, I heard about this when I was doing my book, like dissertation about Gompo Nangje way back. But at the time I felt like I won't have enough sources to allow me to really look into it. And then by the time I wrote the paper I present at Bergen, and Professor Jatso from Harvard said, you kept on saying, I don't have enough sources, but you wrote so long. So I said, because I dig, and I said, a lot of oral sources. I'm also like struggling with how to deal with the oral sources. And so that's some methodologically need to be very careful. Yeah. That's something I think eventually before I publish it, I still need to really look into. And these are very preliminary findings here. Yeah.
I mean, very basic human nature.
Yeah.
When you're looking for protection or favor, you say Duman. If they don't give favor, then you say Duman.
Yeah, can be.
Okay, next one.
I'm tempted to make a comment.
Please do.
I think very,
Yeah.
very often, I think we claim, like in social discourse among
Yeah.
ourselves, that
Yeah.
we mention, in this case, for example, we have mention of 3
Right.
names of women, and based on their case studies, we are probably tempted to say that in
Yeah.
our society, in Tibet, women have equal rights.
Yeah.
Men.
Yeah.
And it could be sometimes quite misleading,
Yeah. Can
because
be.
in
Yeah.
reality, I don't think in the past as well as in the present time, Tibetan women enjoy equal rights. I don't think so. I wonder how you feel about it.
Oh, that's actually in the paper. I have a disclaimer about that. I did write about it, saying like we are not saying that really Tibetan women enjoy equal rights, but comparatively speaking, like compare with other like. Especially Chinese, I'm more familiar with, or even Korean or like Japanese, like all these, because when I taught in the US, I need to teach about East Asia. So I read a lot about them. I think compared with them, we enjoy slightly more freedom. And this had a lot to do with, I think here I didn't go into detail, but in my other paper about the Tibetan middle women, I presented at Oxford, I actually also mentioned that because they were very active in agriculture, economic life, agricultural life, all these spheres. And therefore, compared with the Chinese, because for Chinese elite women, you were restricted to the domestic sphere. So in a sense, you had to depend on men for all the support. But for Tibetan case, more or less, not just these case studies, because when I did the other paper, I also look into non-elite, like all the Tibetan, and so also customary laws in Jekungdo, like in Jekungdo, like in Yushu area. And so you would find that it's possible for daughters who already married into another family to be able to inherit, or the son-in-laws to be able to inherit the property of their of her natal family if the family had no heir. But I mean, in Chinese case, this would, I mean, a lot of the Chinese ethnographers, they actually marveled at this and said, oh, look, Tibetan women could do this, yeah. And so you are right. I think you need to be careful how to draw general conclusion out of a small number of case studies. But I mean, that's in school, the professors always teach us, like, need to be nuanced. And so that's something I think in the paper I'm going to definitely mention. I'm not implying have equal rights, completely equal. Even now it's not, yeah. But comparatively speaking, enjoy more freedom and slightly higher status, precisely because of their active involvement in economic and in all this sphere. In addition to that, also Tibetan rule of inheritance, rule of ownership. Because I'm working on a book, new book, hopefully it will come out at the end of this year, to really also look into, look into Kham as a region, like for female, in a way to really look how this different, how to call it, compare with other, other societies, how Tibetans actually really treated the role of inheritance, succession, and management of ownership. And especially I mentioned like house society, like in anthropology we emphasize that a lot, is because the family name is kami. The name of the household is much more important to be able to carry on. Sometimes it did not matter as much who would be the who would be the ones who live in the house in a way. And so this more or less kept in part of Kham area, that in Godrang, I talked about in Godrang trading houses, also like that. You would have son-in-laws, sometimes half Chinese, half Tibetan son-in-laws marry into the family, and then they would continue to carry on the household name in Tibetan. And so it's very interesting, very different from the Chinese concept of name, you know, say Wang or Li, you have to have the blood. Otherwise, they would say in Confucian tradition, if you had no children, that's the most unfilial like action. In Tibetan case, I think this would not be relevant. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay.
It's very insightful and knowledge.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask, like, when in Tibetan, in general speaking, Tibetan women are usually a very compassionate, linked to their compassionate women. When you say like Dumu, does it mean that now we have to take Dumu as a other way, or like in Tibetan, when we say Dumu, it's like something very evil, like this is bad woman, she's like good woman. Now in this term, like, does it mean they take other way around, like Dumu is a good person?
I think Genla and I, we were talking, and I said, like, it seemed to be Dumu has a negative and a positive connotation there. So on one hand, when you say Dumu, maybe like say wrathful, it's really not compassionate, like not benevolent, yeah. But at the same time, it really suggests that they were very powerful, and so have authority. So it's you can read. I mean, I get the sense when people talk about them, not necessarily when in auto interviews, they don't say, "Oh, these were bad, they kill people." They just say, "Oh yeah, they were known as Kampa Dumusong," and then they start to talk about what they did, yeah, and so emphasize like the ability to lead the troops, all these things. So in a sense, I think maybe in the context itself, I feel like Dumu does not necessarily have that only bad connotation. Maybe in all of the power, like fear, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Very.
Slang, English slang, wicked to that.
Oh, wicked. Wicked, yeah. So, yeah, sometimes I think you're right. It's hard because in Tibetan, when we translate them into English, then sometimes have extra layers of reading to it. Yeah, that can be. Yeah.
Before this pre-drama,
Yes.
I think they married once.
Yeah.
Are they restricted to have another mapas?
Oh, actually, no, I didn't actually mention here. I think, let me think, only once, yes. Not restricted. For Yangchen Kongzhu, I think she decided not to. Eventually, later, I didn't mention, she was a nun. Yeah, she became a nun, yeah. So it's common for but for Chime Dolma, because Gyari Chime Dolma, she lived very young, 35. But Tsewang Dolma. Who? I think I don't have the 1830s, because in the sources they said after the Benevolent Dolma passed away, and then she persuaded her father to drive Wanchu Dorje out of the Gyari family. So don't know the exact dates, but they only say early 1930s. And that's matched with other secondary sources who talk about the declining of the Gyari family, like their authority and power, especially when Wanchu Dorje started to send reading, like jajara, reading groups to really harass the population. So that's around the mid-1930s. And I mean, she was a very, apparently when I read all this account, I can vividly imagine, like, it shows such a character. And so, I mean, even in modern setting, she would be somebody like with a true character, yeah. So very strong will and very like strong-willed, yeah. Oh, so that, yeah.
Thank
just
you so much for the very applauding talk. My question is, since we are talking about the issues of gender and women's leadership, one of the main critiques, feminist critiques of politics at all levels, whether local level, domestic politics or international politics, is that male dominance of politics leads to certain policies that emphasizes domination, war, conflict, and all of this.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain different interpretation of events, different prioritization of issues. So the suggestion is that female leadership would produce different set of policies. So the question is, did the leadership of these three women in Kham at that particular historical period lead to a different type of local politics that sets us apart from the local politics that would prevail under the male, traditional male leaders? So is there anything to suggest that the leadership of these three women produced different type of local politics?
I wish I had detail, like really fine-grained detail information to answer your question. I know, like I understand your question. I think there are some literature suggesting in other cases that women would forge a closer relationship with monasteries and seem to be maybe more subdued policies. But however, here I really don't have enough really detailed sources allow me to make that claim, except that I think when I discussed this with Hildegard as well, because she worked on a lot of gender issue, and she said, like, she also wrote an article about Mongol Qingwang in Ando setting, and she said that, because I was also saying that they were trying to form marriage alliances, but that's nothing new, yeah? The male ones also do. But it seemed to, her interpretation is like she felt that, through her study, she felt that for these women, they need to go out of, like, extra, really try extra hard to have a harmonious or to have a good relationship with all constituency or like all groups, including monastery, including the headmen or these bonds or these, because of inherent weakness as a ruler, as a female ruler. And so I think she has a point there, but for my sources, I really, it won't allow me to pinpoint saying she did this and or she did that because she was a female leadership, especially for Chime Dolma. Gyari Chime Dolma, she seemed to be more brutal, like more fearless, even like than others. Yeah, so she really tried very hard to restore the power and authority of the Gyari family. And so, unless I find more sources, a lot of them I really don't have enough sources to make that claim. Yeah. Okay, thank you. But it's really a good question. I think we are all struggling with how much sources we have and how we should theorize it. Yeah, and that's something I think for my whole life I will never be able to really figure out which one should be more emphasized. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anyone? Or if you know of anyone, any Dumo or any
please let me know.
to contribute.
So I dig around. Yeah.
Out of curiosity,
Oh yes.
some of them very popular Dumos or Domas. But are they known as Dumos or Domas Uzang or in Amdo? How far they?
Oh, I don't know. That's like, you mean these people mostly here, or you mean in Wizan and Ando, whether we?
In Tibet in those days.
I don't know. I really haven't looked into this. But you will find a lot of biographies, only autobiographies of these female saints. Yeah, that's. But I'm not sure. Maybe you like in Ando. I'm not sure whether you have like a strong secular like leaders like. But in Nyarong they do. In Nyarong, yeah. In Nyarong, in Nyarong area, you will find in Republican period they have female leaders, and one of them, I forgot which part of Nyarong. She actually, she actually also dressed up like men, and when she gave audiences, so she wear the same clothes like a king or like a jemu. So again, I think if it's feminist or gender scholars, we will say, okay, maybe she did this in order to legitimate her rule, yeah. But I need to really look into in Nyarong setting like how that played out. Yeah. I mean, Nyarong seems to be another cultural milieu, like very different from what I study about Kham. Nyarong, a lot of times in Kham you would find set hierarchies there, and so in Nyarong sometimes it's more fluid. So you would, because in Kham when you have jebu were always called jebu, yeah, and then you have bun, deba. But in Nyarong they sometimes like the headmen actually would be able to move up. And then eventually, one of them, very famous one is Wasutu. He became very, very, very powerful during the Republican period. And his power actually exceeded all these Chojak Jebu, all these others, yeah? And so it seemed to be much more fluid. And maybe also different borderland, different settings. And you have, in Nyarong you will find Chinese, Tibetan, you have other, like Chang or other groups, and Muslim Hui, and so a lot of interactions with different groups. But in Kham, I mean, we still find these groups, but fewer, like, especially in the heart of Kham. Like when I did the Nyarong book, I was so surprised that very little presence of Chinese up until maybe 1930s. And so when I did also archival research there even, so you would see that Tibetan were still the majority there. And so it's very different dynamics there. Oh, yeah.
Did I hear you correctly that you are going to be publishing this into a book? Or?
Oh, this, I'm still thinking, Hildegard suggests that I should submit to Indo-Asia, Journal of Indo-Asia, but not for this book. I'm writing a new book about Kham, and so Nyarong Gombo ended with the late change, so I'm going to move into the early, really, really final years of the Qing and the Republican period, and that's a new book. Yeah.
So yeah. No any project on particular case? Because out of curiosity, if there was one, I think it would generate a lot of interest. That's my opinion, yeah. Especially among Tibetan women.
Yeah. Right now I have too many projects like on hand. Like still need to finish. I have a project from the Ministry, Chinese Ministry of Education, to really look at how the Chinese intellectuals like Kham areas through their eyes. So a lot of their ethnographical writings. And I wrote a paper for Modern China, Taming the Khambas, but that's only just part of it. So I want to write a full book to really look how they viewed Kham initially as a periphery, like out of nowhere, and then gradually through their effort to integrate the Kham, so they start to portray the Khambas as co-nationals. like nation state subjects. So it's a very interesting project, but I only have about 3 years to finish it, so I have to focus on that. For this, I will pay attention to more, like other, especially for Nyarong one, I think I should actually look more carefully and into it and to see whether I see any differences there are. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe I should ask one thing.
Yeah,
Before 1959, I think that's these are just a very isolated, like a blip on the horizon. But after 59, both under the socialist system inside or democratic system in exile, I think now women's opportunities for social, educational, all kinds of opportunities have widened up, and now we see that in every sphere there are Tibetan women rising.
Yeah.
And one very important, and then women's empowerment, there's the
word. Yeah.
But that boils down to education of girls.
Yes.
So you have experience of education inside, and as well as in America. So I think as many parents be interested about the education of girls generally.
Maybe like my personal experience maybe also help you to understand. So I grew up in a very small village, like in one of the Nyarong, it's called Gotang. Partly because my father was a teacher, like a Tibetan language teacher in Sichuan, like in Zachika. And so he actually attached great importance for education for all of us. Actually, I was the one who they supported me all through. Primary school was 4 years in the village, and then I moved to the town, 2 years, and then in Zachika 2 years. And then I went to Southwest University for Nationalities. They have a preparatory department. It's like a high school attached to it. And so for 3 years supported me. And then I went to Central University. So all my year, and then when I was like, after I gave birth to a baby, then eventually I went to Harvard. So my parents are very exceptional, I think. In my home village, the higher I went, then the lonely I felt. Because first grade, second grade, because when I went to the school, in our school, we didn't teach any Tibetan. So our Nyarong gave, because we had only one Nyarong teacher there, but she didn't teach. She only helped like for the like in terms of like what do you call like a homeroom teacher, like help you if you have some questions in relation to your life or whatever, but not academically. And so the higher I moved up, then gradually I start to lose a lot of my friends, girls, because a lot of family, they felt that no need to educate the girls, because eventually they would marry off, and so I think by the time I got to the fourth grade, then fewer and fewer and fewer. And then when I went to, now it's called Guja, it's a town there. Then also even fewer. So in a sense that I think what you said about empowerment for girls, I think what Maji is doing, I'm really for it. And partly it's like you really need to change the parents' perceptions, and girls can't do as well as boys. And I think nowadays in my home region, they have already realized that. It's much better than when I grew up. Like I went to school in late 1970, and then also 1980s. Another thing, I think one problem is that not just for girls, it's a language issue. When I went to the school, I was 5.5. I was on the younger side. I didn't understand a word of Chinese. And so when I went to school, I didn't understand what the teacher was talking about. Didn't know the homework, nothing. So my sister was 4 years older than me, and at the time she was already fluent in Chinese. But I was very strong, she would say I was very stubborn. So she said, I know, you need to ask your homework. I said, don't ignore me. I said, I will ask. So for 2 or 3 months, then didn't understand. Then about 3 months, then you catch up. But through this process, 2 or 3 months, if you did not cross that hurdle, then you might just lose interest. And so I believe some girls or some boys just decided not to go to school, maybe partly some of the, like, how you did that first step. And so that's why I think it's really, really important. I don't know what's the solution to this, because for Nyarong also it's really difficult, but at least I think it should have some support. But under the current system, I think it's almost impossible. And now I think they were still debating about the effect of the bilingual education. Some argue bilingual education, graduates of bilingual education turned out to be not good at either. Yeah. So in a sense, I think maybe it's more important to at least to change the perception, like saying it's important both for girls and boys, or to at least receive some education, and especially for relatives in the countryside. I think they are looking at the result. So they feel like it's very few families will be able to afford to send the children, like in my case, at high school, like in Chengdu, and then college in Beijing. It costs a lot. So for them, sometimes it's more important to be able to learn a skill. So I think maybe it's more important. We need to differentiate. Like, I mean, we all have different skills, and so some group can be college educated, and then others can learn other things, hands-on like skills, and maybe I think now they are trying to do that in Ganze. They have the, after you finish the 10th grade, I think 9th or 10th, and then if you are not able to get into college, they have what they call 9+3. So they will allow you like 3 more years, then you learned a skill, like repair cars, so all these skills. And so this will allow them to be able to find a job. And so maybe that's also part solution as well. But I'm not an expert on education. Yeah, yeah.
I think we'll stop here.
Okay,
And I really like to thank Sumala for coming here and giving the talk. As part of the Tibet Foundation's main objectives of working in the areas of health, education, and poverty alleviation, and cultural preservation and promotion, and this is part of the cultural preservation. And as and when we get opportunities like scholars like you, Sumala, then we'd like to seize the opportunity to invite them and share their research experience, knowledge with us. And Sumala is really, at the risk of being, sounding flattering, really highly respected academics in the Tibetology circles, and a role model for researchers, not just for Tibetans, but even others who are doing kind of Tibetan studies, because she's, I mean, you've seen her work, but in terms of language, for example, Chinese and Tibetan and English and Japanese and French, and you're also learning German now.
I don't have no.
So if you only know Chinese or Tibetan or Japanese, still there are certain sources that you can't have access to. So in that respect, really, it's great that we are honored that you are able to come and share your research with us. So thank you very much. And then, lamas need disciples, teachers need students, generals need soldiers, speakers need audience for coming here, spending the evening with us. So thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.